There's a lesson I want to give to anyone who wants to start a lifelong dopamine detox. Dopamine detox is not about removing dopamine, but it's about changing where your dopamine comes from. Because a lot of people think dopamine detox means sitting in a room doing nothing for a day. But what actually changed my life was learning how to structure my entire lifestyle differently. I started living this dopamine detox lifestyle about 3 months ago, in January 2026. Before that, like most people, I saw all these videos saying you can reset your brain in 24 hours. Just do a dopamine detox once every week on Sundays and sit alone and avoid any stimulation. But honestly, I understood the idea, but I realized something more important. One day of detox doesn't fix a lifestyle built around constant stimulation. So instead of doing a dopamine detox once a week, I decided to build a lifestyle where I protect my dopamine every day. The biggest lesson I learned in this is your motivation depends on your dopamine baseline, not just your discipline. Your brain is constantly getting easy stimulation. Hard things start to feel harder. But when you lower your cheap stimulation, effort starts feeling rewarding again. And dopamine isn't bad for you. It's actually essential for motivation, drive, focus, discipline, learning, and long-term goal pursuit. Even your ability to stay consistent depends heavily on dopamine. The problem is not dopamine itself. The problem is cheap dopamine. Cheap dopamine is things like scrolling, junk food, porn, endless videos, random stimulation, and constant novelty. These things create huge spikes in dopamine and quick crashes after, which lower your baseline motivation. And over time, normal life feels boring. Earned dopamine comes from things like workouts, studying, reading, building something meaningful, meditation, cold exposure, real conversations, and learning skills. These don't spike as high, but they create something deeper, a stronger baseline. So the first thing I did when starting this lifelong dopamine detox was to build a timetable to structure my day. I opened my notes app and I created a timetable. On the left side, I created a table that wrote down every hour of the day, from when I wake up to when I sleep. And then on the right side, I wrote down what healthy activity belongs there. So example of my daily structure could be 5:30 wake up, 6 a.m. workout, 9 a.m. sunlight, meditation, gratitude journaling, and so on. And that structure changed everything because your structure protects your dopamine. And when you already know what comes next, you reduce random decisions. And that lowers decision fatigue too. And even if you only follow your schedule 50% of the day, it'll be much better than the day you had with no structure. Because without structure, cheap dopamine fills empty space automatically. The second thing that I did was to study dopamine itself, because once you understand how it works, you stop treating motivation like mystery. I learned a lot from Andrew Huberman's podcast and his dopamine episodes on YouTube. And one book that helped explain it well is Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke. Once I understood dopamine scientifically, I started respecting it more. And in the videos, they talked about this rat experiment where dopamine doesn't come just from pleasures, because they reduced the dopamine in one of these rats. They still gave it food. He was still experiencing that pleasure. But once they turned off the dopamine and even put the food just 5 inches away, the rat had no motivation to even grab the food just 5 inches away. So you can still experience pleasure without dopamine, but you won't have any motivation to get the things that actually give you pleasure. So you can see this in real life when a person who dreams about building the aesthetic body, making money online, being successful, and they think about all these things, but they constantly indulge in instant gratification and lower their baseline dopamine. And they think these things are unattainable to reach because they have no motivation, because they've been driving their baseline dopamine so low. The third thing that I did was to reduce instant gratification slowly and replace it with delayed gratification. Instant gratification activities are things that feel easy right now, but make your life worse in the long run. I wrote down every cheap dopamine habit I had. Things that felt good immediately, but made your life worse long term. For example, things like scrolling, junk food, useless videos, overstimulation. Then I didn't try to remove everything overnight. I reduced them gradually. Every time I removed a habit, I replaced it with something harder and healthier. Things like exercise, cold showers, meditation, gratitude journaling, reading, studying, and business work. Because if you remove cheap dopamine and replace nothing, boredom pulls you back. So instant gratification activities come from things that feel easy right now and give a lot of pleasure, but make your life worse in the long term. And delayed gratification comes from activities that feel a bit uncomfortable and hard to start right now, but they have that future payoff and make your life better in the long term. Each time you do an instant gratification activity, your baseline dopamine spikes, and then it crashes below the baseline. So once you're motivated to do a bad habit like scrolling, for example, that's when your dopamine will spike. And after you finish doing the bad habit, like scrolling for 3 hours, and you look at yourself and say, why did I just do that? That's when your dopamine spikes the most. And it goes not just back to baseline, it goes below it. So you have less motivation to do any work right after a scrolling session. And the same can be said for delayed gratification. It's a bit uncomfortable when you first start exercising and doing a hard workout, because you have to get ready, go outside, change, and start lifting the weights. And you have this grit and you have this uncomfortable pain when pushing. But after you finish the workout, how do you feel? You feel way more motivated to complete the rest of the day, especially if you train in the morning. And that's when you feel amazing afterwards. You have more motivation for the rest of your day, and it reinforces the exercise habit. And you'll have more motivation for the future, since you know if you don't quit, you'll build an aesthetic physique. So after a few months, the biggest difference I noticed was simple things started to feeling good again. My mind felt less chaotic, my focus improved, my motivation became more stable, and I didn't need constant stimulation just to feel normal. Harder tasks became easier to begin. So don't treat dopamine detox like a punishment. Treat it like building a brain that can enjoy effort again. You're not removing all pleasures, but you're rebuilding what pleasure comes from. So if you want to start simple, build a basic structure, learn more about dopamine, and reduce one cheap habit and replace it with an earned habit. Do that for long enough and your baseline changes. So yeah, I really hope you use these tactics because they generally helped me, and if it helps you too, that's honestly awesome.